Lori, certainly last but not least, she's the vice chair of our 2025 forum, Lori Moffett-Felber.
Senior principal with Dahlen Group Architecture Planning. We've got 5 offices in the Western States, headquartered in Pleasanton, and a chamber board member.
I think I got everybody, right? Did I miss anyone? No. Okay, good. Well, once again, welcome, and it's all yours, Assembly Member. Please, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for having me, everyone. I really appreciate the invitation to join you on this fall morning. Fall finally feels like it's here, which I'm loving. But it's good to be with all of you, and it's nice to be. We are in interim recess. We finished the legislative session in September, and it's good to be focusing back in the district for a little while. So I'm glad I could be here to talk to all of you. I'll give you a little bit of an update, but I want to make sure I leave lots of time for questions, because I always prefer to talk about what it is you all are interested in talking about rather than what we think you're interested in hearing. So it was obviously a much busier legislative year this year. Last year we shut down like most of the state for a while, and it really limited our ability to move legislation. But this year we were able to move quite a few bills, as you may have seen in the news. Governor Newsom signed over 700 pieces of legislation in the last month. Or months. I guess that probably includes the bills that made it to his desk before the end of session. And we also were able to do some incredible work in the budget this year. As you all know, our economy didn't respond the way we all expected it to when the pandemic hit. And so a year ago, we had passed a budget with a $53 billion deficit. But this year we were seeing incredible surpluses, both because our economy rallied more than we expected, but also because of the federal aid that was coming in. So a lot of those dollars we were able to allocate as well. And so we remained focused this year on COVID relief and ensuring that we were doing the best we could to get both our small businesses, our nonprofits, our arts organizations through this difficult time. I know some sectors are completely reopened, but masks only. Some sectors are still struggling with lower capacity, depending on what it is they do. So we really wanted to give money there. So we put nearly $4 billion into small business grants, and those grants went both to businesses, but also to our nonprofit and arts community, which we think is really critical since they suffered shutdowns for a long time. And we also were able to give dollars directly to Californians and do more through the Golden State Stimulus. 5.7 million Californians received aid through that in addition to the aid they were getting from the federal government. And that came really during the hardest point of the pandemic, which is when we thought they needed it most. So hopefully that helped our economy as well. We also, as I said, I was dropping my kids off, which is why I was a few minutes late, but education, we know that kids took an incredible hit this year. I have a second grader and I'm seeing it firsthand in his class right now. And so we put $93 billion, historic amounts, into education, doing really important things. We did transitional kindergarten for all. Right now, bizarrely, if you are a fall birthday, you get transitional kindergarten in our public schools. But if you're born in May, like my youngest, well, you're on your own. So that system has always seemed bizarre and unjust. So knowing that it is the thing that will set our students up for success the most is being prepared for kindergarten. We've been able to extend that to all California children, which I think is a huge, huge improvement. The data just bears out so clearly that it's going to give us huge returns on our investment in kids' education down the line. It also, interestingly, is the data shows one of the most important things we can do to end the school to prison pipeline is actually focus on education. And so I think it's a really critical piece of when we talk about what it means to reform our system and do racial equity. We also put a lot of money into behavioral health for our youth, knowing that they have really struggled in ways that none of us want to see as a result of this pandemic, making sure that our schools had money to provide counseling to those students. I was just speaking to the head of the wellness centers locally, and the number of students who are seeking services has skyrocketed, both for depression and suicidal ideation, but also eating disorders. And so we really want to support our youth who've struggled through this time so that they get healthy and have the future that they deserve. Wildfire prevention. I know I live, like Juliet, on the other side of the district where we fear wildfires. You guys fear them too. We all live on the land to urban interface. You know, Livermore, part of Livermore lost property last year to a fire, and we know it's real. So it continues to be a huge source of investment for us. $500 million in ongoing investment to do forest thinning, to do preparation, to do those fire breaks that we so desperately need between our communities and that wildland. And then $950 million for, so it's closer to $1 billion we put into it if you add it all up, which is really critical because part of what we're seeing is we haven't done the work, right? So we need to invest now and do it. And hopefully those grants are coming our way in the years to come. We also, clean energy and climate, we had an opportunity, and so we took it to really prepare ourselves for the clean energy future by making huge investments in zero emission vehicle infrastructure and climate resilience and that clean energy transition. We spent a lot of money, excitingly, actually, a lot happening in the Tri-Valley on clean energy storage. So those rolling blackouts in part happened because, as you notice, when we were kids, the rolling blackouts happened at very different times of the day than they do now. Right now, we see it when the sun goes down because we're losing our clean energy resources. That doesn't have to be true, right? If we're storing that energy, we have access to it, but we have not invested in that storage. And so we put a lot of investment this year into storage of our clean energy to make our grid more resilient, which is critical for a lot of reasons. But I would say, I was just talking the other day about how critical it is to our businesses. If our businesses aren't lit, we can't operate. And so I think it's a really critical thing California has to do to stay sustainable. I also was able to bring some really exciting investments directly to the community. We were able to support East Bay Regional Park District in more firefighting equipment, which is obviously, I've already mentioned it once, but really critical. And they, during these huge fires that we see out of our area, a lot of our resources, and especially our air resources to fight fires, leave, right? They go up and they fight the Calder fire, and they're not here locally if a fire breaks out. And last year, the only air resource left when fires was breaking out was the East Bay Regional Park District. And they needed a new helicopter, and we got it for them, which I think is really critical to keep our communities safe. We also were able to invest $2 million in the Iron Horse Trail open space project that's coming to Dublin. So continuing, that's an exciting project, I think, because it's going to be part of our active transportation corridor. We really want that Iron Horse Trail to continue to be an active transportation corridor for people to be able to use their bikes to get where they're going. I worked really hard, and I'm continuing to work hard to bring Valley Link money to the community. I think it's a project that really will change the economics of both our area, but also of over the pass of Stockton and Mountain House. And so we're really trying to get that built, and we'll continue to fight for it. On the legislative side, we spent a good portion of our efforts focused again on small business relief. Last year, we had done paid family leave for small businesses. And one of my concerns when that happened was, look, I represented big companies for a long time. When they didn't make as many mistakes as I imagine small businesses do, because they had lawyers, they had HR departments, they knew how to do these things, right? But if you have a small business with 5 employees, you don't have an HR department. You don't know what those laws or rules are necessarily. And so I was concerned about litigation that would come the way of our small businesses and really harm them, even if they wanted to do the right thing, but didn't understand. And so one of the things we were able to do was put a mandatory mediation program on those paid family leave claims for our small businesses that will be paid for through DFE, through the department. And they will go through the department for that mandatory mediation, find out the rights of the business and of the employees, hopefully just resolve it there. And we can make sure everybody has access to that leave, but not at the expense of our small businesses suffering from long protracted litigation. So that was a really exciting bill that we had signed into law. And I think it's hopefully a game changer. We think that it really, this question of how do we protect our small businesses from this litigation is one that I think we should be more focused on. It's a first of its kind. And so hopefully we'll see more modeled like this, where we can work with our small businesses to make sure they're complying with the law, but that they're not, we're not doing it at the expense of their survival. I also moved a bill along with Senator Dodd on alcohol to go. So we know that one of the lifelines for our restaurants has been the ability to sell cocktails to go. It's been safe. We've seen no uptick in problems as a result of it. And so we wanted to continue that to really get our restaurants into a strong position. And we were able to create a bill, and it was signed into law that will make that permanent, which I think is a really, it sunsets, I believe, but I'm sure that we'll be able to extend it once the sunset happens, but looking at extending that out so that the restaurants have that lifeline continued. And the other thing we did was consumer protection, really looking at how consumers need to be protected through this pandemic. So one of the ways that something that had come to my attention was for the unbanked Californians, we know that they are using these cash transfer apps. So think, Venmo, PayPal as their source of banking. That's how they're holding their money, they're moving their money. And unlike a bank, which has to have a phone line and a way to help you and is highly regulated, these are not. And so individuals who are living paycheck to paycheck and don't have access to that money because they get locked out, they forget their password, simple things, have no access to customer service and they can't pay their rent. And so we did a very simple bill that requires that if you hold a Californian's money, you have to provide customer service and a phone line. You have to help them get access to their money. And that we worked again in partnership with the department to make sure we were doing that in a simple way that's doable for business, but protects our consumers who have obviously important assets in the hands of those businesses. So that's a little bit what we did on the business side. Continued to work on data-driven decision-making. I think it's really critical and I don't think we do enough of it in government. So we moved a bill on our spending as it relates to jails. So we send a lot of money to our counties for programs to help our inmates succeed when they get out. And the audit recently showed that we don't know if that money is even being spent, nevertheless, what it's being spent on. So the bill would ask the counties to report back to us, are you spending that money? How are you spending that money? And what are the success rates? So that we can duplicate the successful programs and stop funding the ones that don't work. So that's a little bit about what we've been working on the legislative side. We had a huge win finally in the Tri-Valley. We were able to save Tesla Park, which is the park we've been working to save for 3 years. Well, 3 years while I'm there, but that effort started long before I got there. And we're very excited that it will be a passive recreation park now. So for hiking, it will remain the wildlife corridor we really need on the Diablo Range, but provide an additional state park for hiking and the like right here in Livermore. Also, an important effort we're working on that I know Pam is well aware of, that the Tri-Valley cities are really engaged in, is this effort to really bring mental health crisis response to our constituents. And there's an incredible effort happening in the Tri-Valley amongst the 3 Tri-Valley cities. And we're trying to support that at the state level by providing resources to those programs so that they can actually fund them, which is always critical, but also so we have easy access into them. So creating a phone line outside of 911 that would allow access to these mental health crisis response services and provide the funding for our local cities and counties to actually respond to those in crisis. So that bill didn't make it, but we're going to continue working on it because we're committed to that work. And I know our cities are way ahead of us. And we really just want to bolster the work they're doing and make sure that we're supporting them. So that is what we've been working on in Sacramento. As I'm sure you're all aware, Sean leads the office here in the district and does an incredible job. They have been working tirelessly through this pandemic to support all of our constituents who needed access to EDD. That has been really the bulk of what they've been doing the last year and a half. That seems to be improving a little bit as the economy has allowed people to go back to work. But we're continue to be available for that work or to help people with DMV or any other state agency, franchise tax board, et cetera. So send them our way. We're here to support them and provide all of our constituents with the help they need. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. Let's please just raise your hand. Or there you go, Pete. Go for it. You're up.
Okay, I'll start. I was glad to hear you mention Valley Link because I think that is, in terms of how you build cities, what needs to happen next, that is a critical thing. I think that would do a whole lot to kind of join what's happening in from Stockton to Tracy to, frankly, all the way to San Francisco or to San Jose. And, there has to be you want an alternative to the automobile. You gotta put in some state money to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. And I think, we have people taking, I don't know if you guys saw the New York Times did a study nationally of the worst commutes in the nation. And the top 2 were on the other side of the pass in the nation. So, right. People are driving 4 hours to get to work and the trucking is increasing, right? And we know that that's only going to continue based on our buying patterns. We used to drive to the store to buy things. We don't do that anymore. So trucks are moving more. So there's more and more congestion, more and more emissions that translates into that's held in that valley all of you live in. And so we really need to be moving to green transportation, which in part means getting our trucks green. That's a huge effort of mine, but also Valley Link. And so I also think, and I've been partnering with the assembly member over there because I think it is going to be a huge economic boon for them. I think that once transportation is meaningful on that side to get in, I think we're going to see jobs coming there, and it's just going to be I think it's going to transform, that part of the region in really critical ways.
Yep.
In line with that, I think we need to look at the rail line from the Port of Oakland to Stockton. It's highly underutilized. We can get a lot of trucks off of 580 if we do that, and people have ignored that for decades.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know that at Alameda County Transportation has really been working on rail transitions at the port. So it's a good point because they've done a ton to be able to get the rail directly into the port to make that easier.
Great. Excuse me, any other questions? Ken has one.
Yeah, Ken Nordell, Assemblymember. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time. One of the biggest disasters here in the state around the pandemic was the scam that we got taken to on EDD early on. I mean, we, the taxpayers, got stuck with $20–30 billion of scam money going out. What are we doing to correct that? And I haven't seen anybody get fired or anybody that got hung up by their ankles where they should have been, maybe. But what are we doing about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so we moved quite a few pieces of legislation. So the first thing we heard was, so a lot of that was coming from our jails, as you may have read. So inmates getting EDD. And one of the initial things we were immediately told was, well, that's because there's no ability legally to double check the social security numbers of EDD applicants with those inmates because we can't cross that private line. So we immediately moved legislation to say, okay, go check the social security numbers. What are you talking about? So we did everything we could to respond to what they were claiming was the reason this all happened. But to your point, it was completely unacceptable. We've had quite a few hearings on it, but continue to do our best to hold their feet to the fire and ensuring not only does this not happen again, but are you going out and getting as much of that money as you can? I mean, I don't believe we could ever recover the majority of it, but let's at least try to get what we can back. Again, it's all fraudulently gained money. It's not theirs to keep. So, we are doing our best, but to your point, it's completely unacceptable that we're not being more responsible with state dollars. And I will say that one of the things that then it has made us more aware of and we've been focused on is other programs, right? So for example, the rent relief program that came out that we were giving individuals access to rent relief. We were asking a lot of questions as that program rolled out. What are the fraud checks? How are we making sure this is going to the tenants and the landlords who deserve it? So it is also, I think, making us better going forward. And we have not, and I cross my fingers because there's no saying we want in the future, seen any fraud, large scale fraud coming out of that. So hopefully the changes that were made as a result make us better with your money going forward, because you're 100% right. It is unacceptable. It was way beyond anything any of us could have imagined. And I will say it's endemic of the failure of EDD's system. I mean, when we went into the pandemic in 2020, you couldn't change your password online. If you had gotten, unemployment a few years ago, right? And then, you got a job, you weren't on unemployment, you were going back on unemployment and you forgot your password. How many times does that happen to all of us? That we've gone back to a website and we're like, oh, I don't remember my password. You couldn't change your password online. You had to send a letter. You had to go through this entire paper process to change your password, right? So their system was so fraught with problems that they were not able to do the fraud checks to provide, the technological banks do it every single day, right? So we know it's possible and we need to be emulating the best practices of the private sector because they're doing it better than we are.
Thank you. Brad, did you have your hand up there, I thought? Yeah.
Yes, Assemblywoman, thank you very much for your service. And I have two questions. First, dealing with the legislature. The legislature recently sent 866 bills to the governor's desk, which is beyond absurd, and gave him 30 days to consider them all. Would you support legislation to limit the number of bills each legislator can submit to 2 or 3 per session, and give the governor 60 days to consider the bills? That's one question. The second question deals with water. The voters of this state passed water bonds in the billions of dollars a number of years ago, and yet the state bureaucracy has sat on its hands and virtually refused to do anything. The Sites Reservoir should have been built years ago. Why is the legislature and the governor so unwilling to tackle meaningful action, not legislation, but action to deal with water? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let me start with your first question about the number of bills. So when I believe our rule, we do have a rule about the number of bills. I want to say I don't even know, it's so high. It's like 40, something I would never even consider, but it's absurd over the 2-year session. Our bill load always is, so for example, my AB 988, which I mentioned, my mental health bill, is still moving because it's a 2-year legislative session. So our bill limit is based on the 2 years, right? Because they continue moving potentially if they don't make it to the governor's desk, which I think that part makes sense, that it should be based on the 2 years. And then we all start over the next 2 years. What is the right number is a good question. As a result of the pandemic, it was not a law, it was an internal decision and rule. We decided this year that no legislature was allowed to send more than 12 bills to the other house. So you could introduce more, but at the end of the session, if you got 12 bills to the assembly floor at the end of the House of Origin, so in May, you could not move more than 12 to the Senate, and vice versa. So that was obviously a lot more than 2, but less than what I've seen. I mean, my first year, people were moving 25 a year, right? Twice what we said this year. And I think as a result, people were more thoughtful, right? They were more, instead of just doing everything they dreamed of, they were more thoughtful. The hard part about going to 2, I mean, what the right number is, I don't know. I know it's not 80 or whatever, or 40. It must be 80 because people were moving 25 years. So it has to be 80. But I know it's not that high, but 2, I mean, some of the bills we move, they're technical in nature. I moved a bill this year that updated a law that hadn't been updated since the 80s and had no protections. It's a criminal law that protects from threats. And there was nothing in it that talked about the internet, right? Because at the time of the passage of the bill, there was no internet, right? So something like that, which is a bill, it's not that sexy, if you will, right? So some of the bills we move are just updates to the law or things that are logical. And those usually those are on consent, and sometimes people bring up a bill like that to me and I haven't heard of it because it was on consent the whole time, because it was sort of a technical update that the whole legislature was like, yeah, no, of course the internet should be included in this, right? We've been updating our code to be gender neutral. I did a bill that, again, nobody actually heard in committee, that all of our constitutional officer code was just male, which is problematic given that we have constitutional officers that are female. Again, not something that really impacts anybody or anybody had to hear or increased our workload, but is meaningful in that, our code should reflect the state of where we are. So I think there's a lot of bills that move like that are good, but don't require a huge workload, but are important in that they update where we are as Californians. And then the question is the bigger bills that actually really impact us. And, we have a lot of bills, and Pam, I'm sure, has spends her day trying to figure out what we've done to her and the increased load of work on the cities, right? So for example, that kind of stuff that has a huge impact. How many of those do we move, especially right now when we know our city staffs have been decimated because of the economy, right? Like that's, I think, where the question becomes more real. And I don't know what the right number is, but I think part of what it is incumbent upon us to do is pay a lot of attention to what's moving and not allow stuff to move that shouldn't become law, right? And 700 bills were signed by the governor, a lot more started, right? And didn't make it through committee and didn't make it off the floor. And we decided an appropriation said this is too expensive or it doesn't fit in the budget, right? And so we are doing that work, but I don't know what the right number is. You asked about 60 days for the governor to consider them. So part of the problem is for a bill that is signed into law, it goes into effect in January. If we gave him longer, then the agencies or the cities or whoever it is that has to actually get ready to deal with that law in January would have less time. So that would impact the down the line people, and I think in a problematic way. He doesn't just have 30 days. When we are moving these pieces of legislation, we are engaging the governor's office every single step of the way. So they are talking to us, they are engaged with us, they're telling us what they think. We're working with the agencies that are impacted. If there's an agency impacted, I mentioned that actually in my legislative update, that I was working closely with the agencies that would do these things. And so he doesn't just have 30 days, right? They've been engaged in this. They know what they're going to do. It's slow rolls, but on most cases, they've already spent a lot of time thinking about this. And we know, and they know what they're going to do even before it gets to the governor's desk, right? You know, I had a bill that the bill related to reporting on the money that's going to the counties. We couldn't get to the right definition. So it's sitting in the Senate because the governor's office said we really need to get the right definition. So again, you know, coming from, there's input on both sides well before it gets there. So I don't think he needs more time. And I think if they got more time, we'd have real crunch on the other end, right? If all of a sudden, you know, the way city permits have to work changes and they have 30 less days to figure that out, I actually think that would be really hard. So I think I probably wouldn't want to shorten his timeline. And then you asked about water. That's a great question. And I would invite you to watch my drought town hall. We had one just, I think it was last week, we did a drought town hall. And this was actually one of the things we talked about. And we had someone on from the California Water Board. And he really, and we asked him a lot of questions, you know, what's happening with the money, the water bond money, what's happening with the investments we've made with the budget, right? I mean, there's money coming in for building up, you know, Los Vaqueros and other places, and it's not happening fast enough. And why not? And these are dollars that you guys have spent that should be getting in, and now we're in a drought and we don't have those resources, right? And so we did ask a lot of questions, and we should continue to, because it should move faster and it should be happening, and we need it so desperately. So you asked a great point, and I would invite you, there's a whole hour you can listen to on this topic on my website. Oh, Sean just put it in the chat.
Just put in the chat. Thank you, Sean. We have time for one more question. Is there another question from the audience? No more questions?
Oh, I got a question.
Oh, there you go, Becky. Good.
Hi. My question is, and I don't think this is on any current legislative agenda, but I am very interested from the climate action point of view is there any enabling legislation that's being considered to allow businesses and government to participate in the international carbon markets to recover our costs from environmental action? So that, you know, for instance, Amazon's coming to Pleasanton. They have a pledge to be carbon neutral by 2040. And the city has an obligation to do that by 2045. Is there any enabling legislation being considered that would promote like a city-Amazon partnership to create a climate action carbon sequestering during plan for the property that they're considering buying? You know, I know that's kind of futuristic, but I think in many ways we're entering a new area, and I'd like to see if, you know, we could sort of unleash the entrepreneurial spirit of the business community and the planning spirit of government to come together to recover our costs.
Yeah, no, I think that's really smart. And I think, I mean, you may have heard me talk about it now many, many times over just this 30 minutes, but I think we're best when we're partnering, right? I mean, we all have such incredible things to bring to the table. And the more we do public-private partnerships, the better off we are as a government, and the more we can support business and the private sector. So not that I know of, but I think it's a great idea. So hopefully we can talk more in depth. I know we're going on time, but.
All right, great.
Great. Well, I think that about covers it. I know the Assemblymember has many things to do today, as we all do. So I want to just thank you very much for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule, especially with those 3 young children of yours. You know, from the chamber perspective, we thank you for your support of Valley Link that you talked about, and the small business bills that you also mentioned. Very helpful to our small business community. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great fall day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Good to see you all, even if only virtually.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you, everyone.
Bye.